Elena Martinez had always believed that love could conquer anything. Standing in front of her bedroom mirror that Friday evening, adjusting the delicate silver necklace her husband David had given her for their 5th anniversary, she wondered when that belief had started to feel more like a desperate hope than a living truth. The house felt unusually quiet without David's usual Friday night routine of sorting through work papers at the kitchen table. Tonight was different. Tonight, his boss Marcus Hartwell was hosting the annual company dinner, and for the first time in their marriage, Elena would meet the man whose name had become a constant presence in their conversations, and not always in ways that brought comfort to her heart. "You look beautiful," David said from the doorway, his tie still undone around his neck. But Elena caught something in his voice that made her turn away from the mirror to study his face. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago, and his smile seemed to require more effort than it used to. "What's wrong?" she asked, crossing the room to help him with his tie. Her fingers worked the silk with practiced ease, but she could feel the tension in his shoulders. David hesitated, and in that moment of silence, Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air drifting through their bedroom window. "Nothing's wrong," he said finally, but his hands found her waist as if anchoring himself to something solid. I just ... I need this evening to go well, Elena. Marcus has been talking about restructuring the department, and you're worried about your position." Elena finished the thought he couldn't bring himself to voice. She'd watched him pour his heart into Hartwell Industries for 7 years, climbing from a junior analyst to senior project manager through sheer determination and countless late nights that had stolen pieces of their time together. David nodded, and Elena saw something vulnerable in his dark eyes that made her chest tighten. "We need this job, Elena. The mortgage, your mother's medical bills, everything we've built." She silenced him with a gentle kiss, tasting the fear he was trying so hard to hide. "We'll get through this," she whispered against his lips. "We always do." But as they drove through the winding roads toward Marcus Hartwell's estate, in the hills overlooking the city, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift in their carefully constructed world. The Hartwell mansion emerged from the darkness, like something from a dream or perhaps a warning. Warm golden light spilled from tall windows, and the sound of laughter and conversation drifted across the manicured gardens. Elena had known Marcus was wealthy, but seeing his home made her suddenly conscious of the small run in her stockings and the fact that her dress, while beautiful, had come from a department store rather than a boutique. "Remember," David said, quietly as they walked up the stone pathway, "Marcus can be intense. He has strong opinions about loyalty, about dedication to the company." Elena squeezed his hand, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers. "David, you're one of the most dedicated people I know. Whatever happens tonight, Elena." "David." The voice that interrupted her was rich and commanding, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. Elena looked up to see Marcus Hartwell himself approaching them across the foyer, and she understood immediately why David had seemed so on edge. Marcus Hartwell was not what she had expected. Tall and broad-shouldered with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question his place in the world. But it was the way those eyes lingered on her face, taking in details with an intensity that made her breath catch, that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "So this is the famous Elena," Marcus said, taking her hand in both of his. His touch was warm, his smile genuine, but there was something in his gaze that made her feel as if he was seeing straight through to thoughts she hadn't even acknowledged to herself. "Famous?" Elena managed, acutely aware that David had gone, very still beside her. Marcus's laugh was low and warm. "David talks about you constantly. His brilliant wife, the woman who keeps him grounded. I've been curious to meet the person who inspired such devotion. The evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Elena found herself swept into conversations with Marcus's other guest successful couples who seemed to exist in a world of private clubs and winter homes in places she'd only seen in magazines. But no matter where she moved in the elegant rooms, she was aware of Marcus's presence, of the way his eyes would find her across the crowd, of how he had a talent for appearing at her elbow just when her wine glass was empty, or when she found herself standing alone. "You're not what I expected," Marcus said during one such moment, as Elena stood on the terrace overlooking the city lights, seeking a few minutes of quiet air. "What did you expect?" she asked, turning to face him. The evening breeze lifted her hair, and she caught him watching the movement with an expression that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "Someone less aware," he said carefully. "David's description painted you as sweetly domestic, content with your small world. But I see intelligence in your eyes, Elena. Curiosity. A sense that perhaps you sometimes wonder what else might be possible." The words hit closer to home than she cared to admit. Elena had loved her life with David, had chosen their quiet happiness over the career ambitions her college friends had pursued. But lately, especially during David's long absences at work, she had found herself staring out windows and wondering about paths not taken, about dreams deferred for love. "I'm perfectly happy with my life," she said. But even to her own ears, the words sounded more like a question than a statement. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtly masculine. "Are you? Because from where I stand, you look like a woman who's been waiting for someone to see who she really is." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she should step away, should return to David's side, should end this conversation that was veering into territory that felt both dangerous and thrilling. Instead, she found herself asking, "And who do you think I am?" Marcus's smile was slow and knowing. Someone extraordinary who's been convinced she should be content with ordinary. Before Elena could respond, David's voice cut through the evening air. "Elena? There you are." He appeared on the terrace, his face tight with something that might have been worry or suspicion. "I've been looking for you." "Just getting some air," Elena said quickly, stepping away from Marcus and toward her husband. But she could feel the heat in her cheeks, the way her pulse was still racing from Marcus's words. Proximity. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and careful distances. Elena made sure to stay close to David, too. Laugh at his stories and touch his arm in all the ways that proclaimed to the room that she was his. But she was acutely aware of Marcus watching them, of the thoughtful expression in his eyes, whenever they rested on her dot. It was nearly midnight when Marcus approached them near the front door where they were saying their goodbyes. "David, I hope you'll consider what we discussed about the Singapore project," Marcus said, shaking David's hand with both warmth and authority. "It's a significant opportunity." Elena felt David tense beside her. Singapore hadn't been mentioned during dinner conversation, and from David's reaction, this was news to him as well. "Singapore?" David asked carefully. "A 2-year assignment to oversee our expansion into the Asian markets. It would mean a substantial promotion, of course. Vice President of International Development." Marcus's eyes flicked to Elena. "Though I understand such decisions affect more than just the employee. It would be a big change for both of you." Eleanor's mind reeled. 2 years in Singapore. A promotion that would secure their financial future, but take them halfway around the world from everything familiar. That's an incredible opportunity," David said slowly, and Elena could hear the war between ambition and uncertainty in his voice. Think it over, Marcus said smoothly. But don't take too long. These opportunities have a way of disappearing if not seized quickly. His gaze settled on Elena once more. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. The drive. Home passed in relative silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were in their own driveway that David spoke. Singapore, he said quietly, staring at their modest house with its small front garden and the porch light. Elena had forgotten to turn on. Can you imagine? Elena looked at their home, at the life they'd built together, and felt something shift inside her chest. It's a big opportunity, she said carefully. But? David turned to her, reading the hesitation in her voice. But what? If it's not just about the job? The words tumbled out before Elena could stop them. What if Marcus has other reasons for wanting to send you away? David frowned. What do you mean? Elena hesitated, remembering the intensity in Marcus's eyes. The way he'd looked at her, spoken to her. The way he'd made her feel seen, in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. I think he was interested in more than just your work performance tonight. Elena, you're imagining things. Marcus is my boss, nothing more. But Elena wasn't so sure. As they prepared for bed in their familiar bedroom, she couldn't shake the memory of Marcus's words on the terrace, or the way her heart had responded to his attention. She loved David, had always loved David, but Marcus's presence had awakened. Something in her that she'd thought was safely buried under years of contentment and routine. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call. Elena was in the kitchen, still in her robe, when David's phone buzzed on the counter. It's Marcus, David said, his voice immediately tense. On a Saturday morning. Elena watched her husband's face as he answered, saw the surprise, then confusion, then something that looked almost like defeat. Yes, sir. I understand. Monday morning. Yes, I'll be there. What was that about? Elena asked as David hung up. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she recognized as his way of processing stress. He wants to meet with me Monday morning, privately, to discuss the Singapore position. That's good, isn't it? It means he's serious about offering it to you. Maybe. David's expression was troubled, but he also said something else. He said he wanted to discuss what's best for everyone involved, including you. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What does that mean? I don't know, David said, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he suspected more than he was willing to voice. The weekend stretched endlessly before them, filled with unspoken tensions and careful conversations. Elena found herself thinking about Marcus at odd moments, while folding laundry, while watering her small herb garden, while lying next to David in their bed. She remembered the way Marcus had looked at her, as if he could see past all the roles she played: wife, caregiver, supporter to the woman underneath, who had dreams and desires of her own. By Sunday evening, she had made a decision that surprised even her. I want to be there, she told David as they sat on their small back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Be where? At your meeting with Marcus tomorrow. If he's going to discuss what's best for me, then I should be part of that conversation. David looked at her with surprise. Elena, this is business. You don't need to. Don't I? Elena turned to face him fully, and for the first time in months, she felt fully awake, fully present. David, we're talking about our entire future, our life together. If Marcus has some kind of agenda that involves me, then I want to know what it is. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because David nodded slowly. Okay, I'll call him and ask if he can join us. But when David made the call, Marcus's response was immediate and unsurprising. Of course, Marcus had said. his voice carrying clearly through the phone speaker. I was hoping Elena would want to be involved in this decision. After all, it affects her just as much as it affects you, David. Monday morning arrived grey and drizzly, matching Elena's mood as she dressed for what felt like one of the most important meetings of her life. She chose her outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that was professional but feminine, paired with the pearl earrings David had given her for their first anniversary. She wanted to look like a woman who belonged in boardrooms and important decisions, not someone who could be easily dismissed or manipulated. Hartwell Industries occupied a sleek glass building downtown, and Elena had visited only once before, shortly after David was hired. As they rode the elevator to the 20th floor, she tried to calm her racing heart and organize her thoughts. Whatever Marcus wanted, whatever game he might be playing, she was determined to protect her marriage and her husband's career. Marcus's office was exactly what she had expected: large, elegantly furnished, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. But it was Marcus himself who drew her attention as they were ushered in by his assistant. He rose from behind his mahogany desk with that same confident smile, but Elena thought she detected something different in his demeanor today. A sharpness, perhaps, or a sense of purpose that felt more pointed than his charm at the dinner party. "Elena, David, please sit." Marcus gestured to the leather chairs arranged in front of his desk. "Can I offer you coffee? Water?" They both declined, and Elena noticed how David's hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white with tension. "I'll get straight to the point," Marcus said, settling back in his own chair, but keeping his eyes primarily on Elena. "The Singapore position is real, and it's David's if he wants it. 2 years full relocation package and a salary increase of 40%. Elena felt David's sharp intake of breath beside her. 40% was more than they had dared to hope for. "However," Marcus continued, and Elena felt her stomach drop at that single word, "I have a proposition that might be even more beneficial for everyone involved." "What kind of proposition?" Elena asked when David seemed unable to find his voice. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I have a personal project I've been working on. A foundation focused on arts education in underserved communities. It needs someone with vision, intelligence, and passion to oversee its development. Someone who understands what it means to have dreams deferred, but not abandoned." Eleanor's heart began to race as she realized where this was heading. "I'm offering you that position, Elena. Here in the city, working directly with me. The salary would be substantial, the work meaningful, and the opportunity for growth unlimited." "I don't understand," David said, his voice strained. "What does this have to do with Singapore?" Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes as he looked at David. "It doesn't. That's rather the point. Elena stays here, working with me on the foundation. You go to Singapore for 2 years, advance your career, and everyone gets what they need." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena felt as if the world had shifted on its axis, revealing possibilities she had never imagined and choices she wasn't prepared to make. "You want us to spend 2 years apart," Elena said slowly, trying to process what Marcus was really suggesting. "I want you to have the opportunity to become who you're meant to be," Marcus replied, his voice gentle but intense. "Elena, I watched you at the dinner party. I saw how you lit up when you talked about the art history degree you never finished, the museum work you always wanted to pursue. This foundation could be your chance to make a real difference in the world. But my husband will have the career advancement he deserves and the knowledge that his wife is finally pursuing her own dreams instead of just supporting his." Elena felt the words like a physical blow, partly because they contained an uncomfortable grain of truth. When had she stopped talking about her own ambitions? When had she become solely defined by her role as David's supporter? "This is insane," David said, his voice rising. You're asking us to choose between our marriage and our careers. I'm asking you to consider that perhaps they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Marcus replied calmly. 2 years apart, building toward futures. That will make you both happier and more fulfilled. Couples survive separation all the time. And if your marriage is as strong as you both claim, it will survive this too. Elena looked at her husband and saw the conflict written clearly across his face. The Singapore position was everything he had worked toward, the financial security they needed, the professional recognition he craved. But accepting it would mean leaving her behind, and she could see that the idea both thrilled and terrified him. What if I say no? Elena asked Marcus directly. What if I choose to go to Singapore with David? Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Then David doesn't get the Singapore position. I have other candidates, and I'm afraid the opportunity would go to someone whose spouse is more flexible about the requirements of advancement. The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Elena felt her anger flare, that beneath it was something else, a recognition that Marcus was offering her something she had wanted without admitting it to herself. The chance to step out of the supporting role and into something that was entirely her own. How long do we have to decide? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I need an answer by Friday, Marcus said. These opportunities won't wait indefinitely. As they left Marcus's office, Elena felt as if she were walking through a dream. In the elevator, she and David stood in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they reached the parking garage that David finally spoke. What are you thinking? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Elena took a deep breath, trying to organize the chaos in her mind. I'm thinking that 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be considering taking a job that would keep me away from you for 2 years, I would have thought they were crazy. And now? Now I'm not sure what I think. Elena looked at her husband. This man she had loved for 8 years, had built a life with, had planned to grow old beside. David, when was the last time we talked about my dreams? My goals? When did I become just the person who makes your life possible instead of someone living her own life? David's face crumpled, and Elena saw that her words had hit their mark. Elena, I never wanted, I never meant for you to feel. I know you didn't. And I chose it, David. I chose to make your dreams my priority. But maybe Marcus is right. Maybe this is my chance to remember who I am when I'm not just being your wife. They drove home in heavy silence, both of them grappling with questions that had no easy answers. That evening, as Elena prepared dinner in their small kitchen, she caught herself imagining what it would be like to have a professional kitchen, to host dinner parties in a home like Marcus's, to wake up each morning with important work to do, instead of just the quiet rhythms of domestic life. The thought made her feel guilty and exhilarated in equal measure. We need to talk about this, David said from the doorway, and Elena realized she had been standing motionless at the stove, lost in her daydreams. I know, she said, that she wasn't sure she was ready for the conversation that would determine the rest of their lives. They sat at their small kitchen table, the same table where they had planned their wedding, discussed buying the house, shared countless meals and dreams and quiet moments. Now it felt like the site of a negotiation that would determine whether those shared dreams could survive the pull of individual ambitions. I need to know what you really want, David said carefully. Not what you think I want to hear, not what you think is best for us. What do you want, Elena? The question hung between them like a challenge. Elena realized that she hadn't been asked that question, really asked it, in a way that suggested her answer mattered more than its impact on others, in longer than she could remember. I want ... She began, then stopped. The truth felt too dangerous, too selfish, too much like a betrayal of everything they had built together. "Tell me," David said gently, and she saw in his eyes that he already knew what she was going to say. "I want the job," Elena whispered, the words feeling like both a confession and a revelation. "I want to work with Marcus on the foundation. I want to remember what it feels like to be good at something besides taking care of other people." David nodded slowly, and Elena was surprised to see something that might have been relief in his expression. "And I want Singapore," he admitted. "I want the promotion, the challenge, the chance to prove I can handle something this big." They looked at each other across the table, and Elena felt as if they were seeing each other clearly for the first time in years. Two people who loved each other perhaps lost sight of who they were as individuals. "So we're really considering this," Elena said, 2 years apart. "Maybe we need it," David said quietly. "Maybe we need to remember who we are when we're not just us." The words should have felt like the end of something, but instead, Elena felt a strange sense of beginning. As if after years of moving through life on autopilot, she was finally waking up to possibilities she had forgotten existed. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the world itself was encouraging new beginnings. Elena dressed carefully once again, but this time her outfit felt like armor rather than costume. She and David had talked through every angle, every fear, every hope over the past week. They had made their decision, and now it was time to live with the consequences. Marcus's office felt different this time, charged with the electricity of change. When they were seated across from his desk, Elena found herself studying his face, trying to read the man who had introduced such chaos into their carefully ordered lives. "We've made our decision," David said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to commit to. "I'll take the foundation job," Elena said, looking directly at Marcus. "And David will take Singapore." Marcus's smile was triumphant, but Elena thought she detected something else in his expression's satisfaction, perhaps, or the pleasure of a gambler whose risk had paid off. "Excellent," he said. "I think you'll both find this arrangement more rewarding than you can imagine." As they discussed logistics and timelines, Elena felt herself splitting into two people, the woman who was terrified of being separated from her husband for 2 years, and the woman who was excited to discover what she might become when given the chance to grow on her own terms. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of preparation. David threw himself into learning everything he could about the Asian markets while Elena began working part-time at the foundation, getting to know the staff and the scope of their work. To her surprise, she loved it immediately, the energy, the sense of purpose, the feeling that her ideas and insights mattered. And through it all, Marcus was a constant presence. Not intrusive, not inappropriate, but always there with encouragement, with challenges that pushed her to think bigger, with a belief in her capabilities that was both flattering and unsettling. "You're changing," David observed one evening as they packed his belongings for the move to Singapore, which was now just 2 weeks away. "In what way?" Elena asked, though she knew what he meant. She could feel the changes in herself anew. Confidence, a sense of purpose that extended beyond their relationship, a growing awareness of her own desires and ambitions. "You seem more yourself," David said, and the sadness in his voice made Elena's chest tighten. "More like the woman I fell in love with in college, before we got so caught up in building a life together that we forgot to keep building ourselves." Elena stopped folding his shirts and looked at her husband, really looked at him. "Are you having second thoughts?" David was quiet for a long moment. "About Singapore?" "No." "About us?" "I don't know, Elena. I love who you're becoming, but I'm scared that the woman you're becoming won't need the man I've been." Elena crossed the room and took his face in her hands, seeing the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. "I will always love you," she said fiercely. "But maybe we both need to become the people we're meant to be before we can figure out how to love each other as we really are." David's eyes filled with tears, and Elena realized that her own were falling as well. They held each other in their half-packed bedroom, grieving the end of one version of their marriage while hoping for the birth of something stronger. The night before David's departure, Marcus invited them both to dinner at an intimate restaurant downtown. Elena wasn't sure what to expect, but she was surprised by how normal the evening felt, three adults sharing good food and conversation, with no undercurrents of tension or hidden agendas. It wasn't until Marcus walked them to their car that the evening took an unexpected turn. "Elena," he said, his hand gentle on her arm as David got into the driver's seat, "I want you to know that whatever happens over the next 2 years, you have my complete support, personal and professional." There was something in his tone that made Elena look at him more carefully. In the soft light from the restaurant's windows, Marcus looked different, less commanding, more human, almost uncertain. "Thank you," she said carefully, not sure what else to say. "And I want you to know," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "that this arrangement isn't just about business for me. It never was." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Marcus, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm just telling you that you matter to me. More than you should, perhaps, but there it is." Before Elena could respond, Marcus stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Drive safely," he said, as if the previous moment had never happened. Elena got into the car with shaking hands, her mind reeling from Marcus's admission. Beside her, David was quiet, and she wondered how much he had overheard. "Did you know?" David asked quietly as they drove through the empty streets toward home. "Know what?" "That he has feelings for you." Elena considered lying, considered protecting David from this final complication. That they had promised each other honesty, had committed to facing the truth no matter how difficult. "I suspected," she said quietly. "But I wasn't sure until tonight." David nodded slowly. "And how do you feel about it?" Elena stared out at the familiar streets of their neighborhood, thinking about Marcus's intensity, his belief in her, the way he made her feel seen and valued in ways she had almost forgotten were possible. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know how I feel about anything anymore." The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for new beginnings and painful goodbyes. Elena stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching David close his suitcases, and felt as if she were watching the end of one story and the beginning of another. At the airport, they held each other longer than necessary, both of them reluctant to let go of this moment that marked the end of their life as they had known it. 2 years, David whispered against her hair. 2 years, Elena agreed, but she wasn't sure if it sounded like a promise or a prison sentence. As Elena drove home alone from the airport, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Your new chapter begins now. I can't wait to see what you write." Elena stared at the message for a long moment before starting her car. 2 years stretched ahead of her, full of unknowns and possibilities that both thrilled and terrified her. She thought about David, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, flying toward his own uncertain future. She thought about Marcus, waiting for her at the foundation with projects and challenges and an intensity that made her pulse quicken, despite her better judgment. Most of all, she thought about herself, Elena Martinez, not just David's wife or Marcus's employee, but a woman with her own dreams and desires and the chance, finally, to discover who she might become when given the freedom to choose her own path. As she pulled into her driveway and looked at the house that suddenly felt too empty and full of possibilities at the same time, Elena realized that everything had indeed changed behind closed doors. The question now was whether those changes would ultimately strengthen her marriage or destroy it, and whether she was brave enough to find out. The story of the next 2 years was just beginning, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena had no idea how it would end. The uncertainty should have terrified her, but instead, as she unlocked her front door and stepped into her quiet house, Elena Martinez smiled and felt more alive than she had in years. After all, the best stories always began with someone brave enough to step into the unknown.